By day 7, I'd learned the most important rule of survival. If you hear a loved one's voice, you absolutely must not answer. It was at the pharmacy, me waiting for my insulin stuff, and this old lady, Mrs. Henderson I think her name was, she was coughing in a way that sounded wrong. Not like the usual dry coughs from that virus everyone had gotten tired of, but this wet, kind of gurgling noise, like it was chewing on something inside her. Then she spat out this thick black stuff, and it landed right on my shoes. Her eyes were bleeding too, veins popping out under her skin, all wrinkled and thin. She whispered sorry, and then her jaw just cracked open, like it wasn't attached right anymore. After that, she went for the pharmacist, and people started screaming and running everywhere. That was the beginning. Day 1, I guess. By day 3, things got worse fast. The whole city smelled bad, like meat left out too long in the heat. The news people from CDC said it was some new kind of flu mixed with that other virus, H1N1 something with Covax at the end, but it didn't feel like just a sickness. It was like the infected, they changed. They built up strength or something. I stayed inside my apartment mostly, peeking out the door hole. But that wasn't the worst part. Saw the ambulance guys trying to help, but they ended up twitching on stretchers, their backs bending until bones poked through their clothes. Cops were shooting at these running bodies, but the heads kept moving even after getting hit, like half blown off and still coming. It seems like they got smarter too, or adapted, I mean. One of them climbed up a fire escape, fingers breaking but holding on anyway, like a bug. Another one hid in a kid's room, in the closet, waiting for the parents to come look at their girl, who wasn't really sleeping. And that noise they made, the jaws clicking wet, like still trying to eat, even when there's nothing there. That part stands out, it's hard to forget. No electricity now, on day 7. Been a while since anyone came around to help. I'm sitting here with a candle, writing this down, because it's the only thing that's keeping me going at this point. Something is scratching outside my door, and it's trying to use a key. My own key that I lost. I think it's my little brother, or what used to be him. If anyone finds this, maybe these things could help you stay alive. You have to aim for the brainstem really, smash it totally, not just a shot to the head. They find you by heat from your body or the sweat when you're scared. That black stuff leaking from their eyes, it's what spreads it, so keep away from it no matter what. And if you hear someone singing, a voice you recognize, just don't respond. Don't go closer, don't respond. Retreat quietly. It might not end well, or at all. In my town, the hidiest ones are safe. It's the beautiful ones you have to run from. What my great-grandmother had told my grandmother, and so on. The one simple rule that threaded through our town and sewed the community together. If they approach you and they are beautiful, do not trust them. If they approach you and they are hideous, thank them and be on your way. If their eyes follow, run and do not look back. That simple, simple rule that had supposedly been the first sentence my mother had ever dared to utter to me. And with that, after a grueling labor, I held my little baby, still covered in mucus and blood and membrane, and whispered the very same thing to her. It was barely audible above her cries, but they let me hold her and soothe her with those words before even cutting the cord attaching us. If they approach you and they are beautiful, do not trust them. If they approach you and they are hideous, thank them and be on your way. If their eyes follow, run and do not look back. Those very words I mutter to her every day. She isn't old enough to leave the house alone, but I still coax agreement out of her when I mutter those lovely words. Her big eyes are doe-like and bewildered every time I say it. She doesn't understand. She will, though. And then everything I knew was about to change. I remember coming to that same sick understanding. It had been my first out-of-the-house chore at 15, having lived for half of a tricennial and never having been unaccompanied outdoors. My parents sent me off to the small market in the middle of town. A bottle of milk, my father had muttered, favoring counting pennies rather than looking me in the eyes. And here, fix yourself something nice from Tom's. He had handed me an extra crumpled bill to buy myself some candy for the trip home. It should have been a red flag. The market was less than 10 minutes away if I jogged. But I was stupid, and giddy on the idea of exploring the outdoors myself without the hand of an adult clutching my shoulder or palm, as well as the sugary sweet thought of sherbets and sugar straws. If they approach you and they are beautiful, do not trust them. If they approach you and they are hideous, thank them and be on your way. If their eyes follow, run and do not look back. Yes, Father. And so I practically skipped out of the door my mother had held open for me, like a coroner's door at a crime scene, letting spirits of the recently deceased out and familial mourners in. But I wasn't dead. I was bracing myself for the trouble I would get into for spending more than intended on sweet treats and coming home with an unfair amount of change to hand back to my father. He always counted his money pointedly, listening to the sounds of coins clinking together as he dropped them into an old brass jar while slipping the notes underneath, as if the jar were a paperweight. There was misplaced trust there, leaving money out and expecting me not to take it. The adrenaline of getting scolded was the most entertainment I could get, being homeschooled and cooped inside all day. I hardly remember it now, when I forbid my own daughter from even peering through curtained windows. I was out at last, but the rules were my only protection. It was a sunny day. The rays of the sun blur the image in my memory of walking down the street. It blocks the faces of the people I had grinned at, as if to say, "Look at me, I'm out." Despite their visages fading as the sun bleeds into the pictures of my mind, I remember feeling their judgment. In hindsight, perhaps it was concern, but it had made me self-conscious enough to lose myself in my own thoughts. It was then I bumped into her, a woman I can still today only describe as angelic. I remember her starkly. Pale, almost completely white skin, white enough that I could make out the purple-blue veins running up her neck and into her face. Almond eyes and lips that effortlessly pouted, both painted in a gorgeous rouge I had only ever seen my mother wear once or twice to fancy events like weddings or funerals. She was different to my mother, though. It was the only point of comparison I could make at the time, as my mother was the only woman, or human in general, I spent any time around. Unlike my mother, who had human blemishes and wrinkles, this woman was almost flawless. I say almost, as even then the porcelain doll-like texture of her cheeks, where there should have been pores and hairs, rendered me perturbed. Another thing I noticed was she was dressed differently. Her skinny arm was steadying me and draped by smooth white cloth adorned with silver ornaments that looked like ankhs or crosses had they not been facing downwards due to the weight of the metal. She looked like the type of woman my mother might call ungodly, with moderately exposed cleavage and eyes like a nymph's, nails long and lips scandalously colored. Even so, her golden hair cascaded around her and shone like a halo under the summer sun, and her perfectly manicured nails grazed me, holding onto my arm as I stumbled into her. I strangely liked the feeling. It made blush overtake my cheeks. "I'm sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going," I mumbled, bewitched by the almost yellow glint in her feline eyes. She slow blinked at me like a cat, smiling with a perfect row of teeth and patting me before removing her hand from me entirely. I felt the absence as she retracted her hand to tinker with her silvery jewelry. "That's all right, I've got you." It was only then that I tore my gaze from her eyes, as pretty as they were. I thought I was safe, but things were about to get worse. In the middle of her forehead was something I had never seen before. A strangely horrific sight that catapulted me back into reality. It looked as if to be a tattoo at first, an upside-down triangle with a larger circle encompassing it. It was only small, but it marked a good portion of her forehead, seeming crude in comparison to the rest of her appearance. That wasn't what made my heart stutter and jolt into my throat, though. It was instead the realization that her peculiar markings weren't inked at all, but rather sinewy skin that had left itself open to fester. The blood had long dried, oxidizing to be a bottomless sable. It looked as if it had been cut into her skin so many times that the organ itself had learnt not to bother attempting to scar over, instead folding outwards to form a protruding symbol that had woven itself into her skull. It made her smile less comforting and more threatening. It now read as less of a smile towards me and more as the type of smile you give to yourself because you're excited over a warm bowl of stew or a freshly baked loaf of bread. That comfort you find in the subconscious acknowledgement that perhaps something died for the meal to reach your plate, but it is there for you to enjoy nonetheless. If they approach you and they are beautiful, do not trust them. If they approach you and they are hideous, thank them and be on your way. If their eyes follow, run and do not look back. I watched her eyes twitch, her pupils jittering, as she drank me up and spun her irises from my left hand to my right hand, from my left foot to my right foot, from my jugular to my chest. Then I broke out into a sprint. Her laughter behind me was atrocious. It didn't match the pitch she had previously spoken to me. It was raspy and haggish, snarling in on itself as it curdled, writhing in its own amusement. She didn't follow. She didn't even try to chase. I didn't look back, for fear of those jaundiced eyes blinking back at me. It came to me when I stopped, heaving outside of the general store, that her words and their meaning were fully rendered. "I've got you. Liar." Her words, however siren-like, were untrustworthy. "You all right, lass?" The shopkeep had questioned me when I approached the counter with a cheap paper bag and a milk carton. I must have looked a mess, sweat clinging hairs to my face after my ponytail had come loose on the run inside. "Yes, sir. Your father owes me labor, he does. Said he'd haul them apple crates round back for me, since me knees are off," he remarked, directing his distaste towards my father's tardiness to me with a raised brow. "I got the message clear as day, though. Bring your father over. I know he's here somewhere," his eyes said. "Just me today, Mr. Mercer," I muttered glumly as I slid bills on the counter and lowered the milk into the bag. The condensation made the bag dampen in places almost instantly. "Oh," he started, before looking like he thought better about what he was going to say. "Oh, I see." I just nodded, thanking him for the milk and taking my leave. He called one last thing to me before I left. "You best skip Tom's and go right on home, Missy. It's getting late, and you don't want to be out after dark." Again, I could hear the words unspoken in his inflection. "You don't want to be out alone after dark." It wasn't until I was already halfway home and walking past the store itself that I revisited Mr. Mercer's words. Tom's Sweet Emporium. The sign beckoned me with its dull, weathered signs and yellow shelves piled high with humbugs and fizzers. How did he know this place was my next stop? It made my stomach feel funny thinking about it, and I ended up walking past the shop altogether. Mr. Mercer was right. It was getting late, and I didn't want to be out after dark, especially not alone. The next happenings of my trip are hard to describe, but I'm inclined to share them nonetheless. I had just passed the bus stop, where I had bumped giddy into that ominous woman. The meeting I had with this being, however, wasn't so sudden. I approached slowly from afar, watching as my eyes slowly but surely focused on the thing in front of me. It was an oozing pile of flesh, with human eyes and mouths and a nose, yet no discernible features that told me it was a person. It seemed more like an amalgamation of multiple people. I could make out some faces in the flesh body, as if they were inside and pushing their way out. The features themselves looked oddly familiar, pointed noses and deep-set eyes, but there was no way I could tell who the people fighting inside the cage of flesh truly were. I cast my mind back to the pretty lady I had bumped into, and the macabre ideas floating through my head filled in the blanks. I retched, almost throwing up the contents of my stomach onto the pathway. I am not ashamed to admit I pissed myself when the thing lurched towards me, leaving trails of flesh and hair and blood in its wake. "Angel of light. Angel of light," it sputtered from its many mouths, the voices all different and ascending through the air like the massacre of a heavenly chorus. Phlegm exuded from every syllable, and I felt wet spatters of flesh on my cheek at every cough and gurgle. "If they approach you and they are beautiful, do not trust them. If they approach you and they are hideous, thank them and be on your way. If their eyes follow, run and do not look back." Thank you," I stammered, and for a moment I thought it was a poor excuse of a thank you. The beast seemed neither appeased nor enraged, just continuing to groan the same phrase, its words traveling like an appetite. "Thank you" was all I left it with as I beelined home. My parents did not speak to me about the things I had witnessed that day. They sat waiting for me on the sofa and stared at the black TV screen as I hauled myself through the door with achy legs. "Oh dear," my mother had uttered, mostly to herself. "Let's get you a bath." And that was the extent of what we spoke of it. My Rosemary will be 15 one day. In a few years she will take the same trek I did, with the same crumpled bill for candy that my father gave me. I can only hope that she follows in my footsteps, that she runs from the devil and makes it to Mercer's general store, that she ignores the temptation of sugar and prioritizes the safety of daylight, that she is polite in the face of hunger, that she not once looks back and runs with open arms toward her future, and most importantly, that she heeds my advice, the same advice that I will drill into her brain and sharpen her instincts to follow, even in times of the worst fright she will ever experience. If they approach you and they are beautiful, do not trust them. If they approach you and they are hideous, thank them and be on your way. If their eyes follow, run and do not look back. Up next. For decades, the lizard in my grandfather's bottle was a dead thing, right up until the moment I accidentally spoke near it. Don't ask questions without direct eye contact. Don't talk to myself or my stuffed animals. Don't eat or drink anything alone. He recited these rules whenever I visited him. Of course, I broke them a few times, never on purpose. And every time Grandpa came running from wherever he was, yelling as though it had been clear all along that it was him I'd been talking to. He would glance around the room while he shouted, his eyes darting as if he was afraid someone else had noticed me. Dad told me Grandpa had PTSD from his time in the army. He'd seen a lot of action in the jungles of Uganda, freeing hostages and fighting rebels. It made sense that one had to be quiet in the jungle. But then why did Grandpa yell? As I grew older, I finally dared to ask him about the rules. He pointed toward the foulest thing in his home, a souvenir from Uganda, a clear bottle of spirits, about the size of a wine bottle, with a large green lizard inside. Grandpa leaned in and whispered, "It might hear us. Never talk to it. Promise me. Promise." From that moment on, I understood the power of PTSD, and I did my best to follow Grandpa's rules. Something was very wrong with that souvenir. Still, he did strange things with the bottle. Sometimes when I entered the living room, the lizard's scales would be swirling inside the bottle, like one of those small Christmas glass balls filled with snow. The question sat on the tip of my tongue for years, but I never asked why. I just assumed Grandpa had shaken it. But things were about to get much worse. It was a strange feeling being alone in his house after he died. But I had made a promise. I was to throw the lizard bottle into a blazing fire, along with some herbs he'd prepared in a small cloth bag. His last words echoed in my ears. Never talk to the lizard. Burn it. Remember the rules. Promise me. Promise me. The sad look on Dad's face flashed before my eyes. It must have been hard, watching one's father grow so delirious, talking nonsense. I shook the thought away and entered the living room. The bottle sat on the shelf, untouched, dust clinging to the glass. The lizard inside was perfectly still. The bottle was warmer and heavier than I expected when I picked it up. I gave it a small shake. Nothing happened. The scales stayed firmly at the bottom, as if glued in place. The front door squeaked. "Hello?" I yelled, turning toward the entryway. The door squeaked again. "Hello? Who's there?" When no one answered, I set the bottle down and walked toward the door. The wind pushed gently against it. The hinges groaned softly. I chuckled and shook my head. My eyes widened when I saw the scales swirling around in the lizard bottle. It was much warmer to the touch, and something else was different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I brushed the feeling aside, remembering my promise. Grandpa's rules weren't just madness. They were his only protection. I stopped at the front door, the bottle heavy in my hands, and squinted toward the small fireplace at the far end of the overgrown garden. A tight knot formed in my stomach. I swallowed. The trees rustled softly in the wind. My throat felt dry. Something about leaving the house felt wrong. Dangerous, even. I shook my head with a nervous smile and told myself I was overthinking it. Surely it had something to do with the few wasps I could detect among the rotten apples. The stakes were higher than I ever realized. I set the bottle down on the living room table, lit a fire in the stove, and sat across from it. While I watched the flames come to life, the danger crept up in me again. Surely the smell would be awful, and perhaps the liquid itself would catch fire, explode even. No, this was also a bad idea. An uneasy chuckle escaped my lips. My mouth felt unbearably dry. Out in the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and downed it in one gulp. Then another and another. Only when I reached for a fifth did I freeze. My stomach stirred. It cried as though I had eaten nothing for weeks. Like some starving soul, I rummaged through the kitchen until my hungry eyes found a can of beans. I didn't even bother with the can opener. A knife was all I needed to pry open the can and gulp down its contents. An icy wave passed up my spine, leaving me lightheaded. The house felt different, quieter, but somehow not empty. Something was here with me. Then I realized I had spoken out loud. I ate and drank alone. I had asked a question aloud. Every rule broken. I knew I had to leave, and I knew I couldn't leave without the bottle, without the lizard, without whatever had been listening so patiently for me to forget Grandpa's rules. Up next. The first sign that something was deeply wrong wasn't the smell in the house. It was the maggot that dropped from the clown statue's eye. "Please let me cover it," the babysitter complained over the iPhone, before conceding defeat when her employer's harsh words invaded her ear. The giant clown statue in the corner continued staring, as if mocking her for not being allowed to come within 10 feet. A vintage poster on the wall spoke of her boss's history, which everyone in Lake Placid, Florida knew. He was a jolly man who was a famous clown in his heyday. Not to mention his late wife was a clown too, and together, they traveled across the United States to give highly acclaimed performances. Now he has been devoting his life to caring for his 5-year-old grandson, Alex, whose parents were often in a major United States city cutting million-dollar deals. A light stench hung in the air. Ignoring it, the babysitter played Subway Surfers. A pat on her shoulder made her jump. Turning around, she heaved a sigh of relief. It was just little Alex wanting to sleep in the living room because of nightmares. As Alex dozed off, the babysitter noticed something landing on the coffee table. A maggot. Looking up, she screamed and rushed out of the house, carrying Alex. Maggots were crawling out of the clown statue's eyes. An hour later, as Lake Placid police stormed the house on a quiet street, the babysitter's boss confessed. The clown statue was his wife's corpse, embalmed in wax. He missed her and wanted to continue looking at the clown he loved. Up next, the first permanent mark my wife left on me wasn't a bruise. My wife and I were living in the same house, sharing the same bed, but we were worlds apart. I tried everything to bridge the gap, but she always seemed so distant, so unenthusiastic. It hurt. I missed the woman she used to be. Then, things changed. We started looking for ways to bring back the intensity, to find that spark that had gone cold. We started exploring a side of our relationship that was more intense, high stakes. It began with her showing a side of herself I'd never seen, a fierce, almost overwhelming possessiveness. It was like she was finally seeing me again. She started pushing boundaries, testing my limits in ways that kept my heart racing all night. One evening, she looked to me with a fire in her eyes that had been missing for years. She wanted to reclaim what was hers. She started leaving marks, not of pain, but of total devotion. I woke up one morning to find she'd even surprised me with a permanent reminder of her love, a symbol of our bond that showed the world I belonged to her. For the first time in forever, I felt truly seen, truly wanted. The way she looks at me now, with that wild, unpredictable intensity, makes me feel more alive than ever. But for the first time in years, I can't wait to find out.